The courtroom was a sea of tension, each second thick with the weight of what was about to unfold. The judge's gavel crashed down with such force it seemed to vibrate through the bones of every person present. A ripple of gasps cascaded through the gallery, spreading like wildfire as the truth, unshackled and raw, tore its way to the surface. At the witness stand, a woman's voice trembled, but her words were a seismic shock. "It's true," she stammered, her gaze flicking nervously around the room. "I did it." The room froze. Time seemed to stretch, each heartbeat reverberating in the ears of every onlooker, as the magnitude of her admission settled into the room like a heavy fog. The atmosphere thickened, every person now holding their breath, as the woman's confession began to sink in. Across from her, the defendant's face drained of color, his jaw clenched tight, his fists curled into desperate, trembling hands beneath the table. No one moved. No one spoke. The truth had been delivered, irreversible and final. And yet, the reverberations were just beginning. The case had changed irrevocably, becoming something much larger than anyone anticipated. This was no longer just a matter of law. This was a matter of survival, the survival of reputations, of freedom, and of lives torn apart by an unspoken betrayal. The silence that followed was suffocating. No one dared to move, as though the very air in the room had been sucked out. The witness had shattered the calm, and in that stillness, the case transformed. The prosecutor, quick to capitalize, adjusted his tie, and stood with his chest puffed, the pride of an experienced manipulator evident in his stance. His opening words were sharp, calculated. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you've heard it from the horse's mouth. The truth is out there. Our job is to make sure it sees the light of day." His words rang with the confidence of a man who believed the battle was already won. But the defense attorney, though caught off guard, regained his composure almost instantly. His fingers drummed lightly on the table, his sharp eyes calculating the next move. He knew that things were not as simple as they seemed. There was more to this story. There had to be. The defense lawyer knew better than to trust the simple version of events. He needed to discredit the witness. He needed to plant doubt, no matter how small, to derail this confession before it took root in the minds of the jury. The next witness took the stand, a man whose nervous eyes darted back and forth between the judge and the audience. His voice cracked as he began, his hands shaking as he clutched the podium. I didn't know," he stammered, glancing up at the defense attorney for reassurance. He looked like a man who had never been in a courtroom before, and the weight of the situation crushed him. His words, though few, were enough to plant a seed of doubt. The jury listened intently, but it was clear that something wasn't right. The witness's testimony didn't match what had been said before. The contradictions were subtle but dangerous. As the witness stumbled through his testimony, the defense attorney's eyes narrowed, picking up on the inconsistencies. He leaned forward, his voice steady as he began his cross-examination. Each word was measured, each question carefully chosen to expose the cracks in the witness's story. The man began to sweat, his mouth dry, and as the defense lawyer pressed further, it became clear that the witness was hiding something, whether by choice or by fear. The prosecutor's eyes flicked between the defense and the witness, realizing that the case was far from decided. The defendant shifted uneasily in his seat, his face pale with dread. The confession had shattered his sense of security, but now, with each new piece of testimony, he began to feel the weight of his own fate. His hands were clenched in tight fists beneath the table, every muscle in his body tense as he waited for the next blow. He couldn't look at the defense attorney. He couldn't look at anyone. His mind raced, and for the first time in the trial, he felt the suffocating grip of helplessness. The trial dragged on, the tension in the air thick enough to slice. The defense attorney, now fully aware of the cracks in the prosecution's case, was sharpening his strategy. His mind worked like a razor, cutting through every inconsistency, every moment of doubt. The prosecutor's once confident demeanor began to waver. Each question, each answer was meticulously analyzed. He had always believed that the witness confession was the key, the smoking gun that would end it all. But now, with the new evidence of contradictions and suspicious testimony, the defense had found a chink in his armor. The courtroom was no longer just a battleground of facts. It was becoming a war of wills, a place where power and persuasion were just as important as logic. The jury, once seemingly convinced, now shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their faces betraying a growing uncertainty. The defense was slowly planting doubt in their minds. This trial was no longer just a legal contest, it was a psychological one. The ground was shifting beneath everyone's feet, and no one could say where it would land. The prosecutor paced, his thoughts racing, but his movements too deliberate, too rehearsed. The weight of the case was becoming unbearable, and he knew it. The closing arguments were nearing, and he had to make a final push to seal his victory. But deep down, he could feel the unease that was beginning to creep into his thoughts. Every decision, every word he'd spoken, had led him here. What if he had misjudged something, overlooked a crucial detail? The defense was more formidable than he had anticipated. They weren't just attacking the evidence, they were attacking his credibility, his interpretation of the truth. The prosecutor had been a man who prided himself on being the embodiment of justice. But now, in the thick of the trial, he was starting to question whether he had been chasing a truth of his own making. The self-doubt gnawed at him, but he knew he couldn't show it. He had to stand strong. One moment of weakness, and everything could unravel. The defense had been subtle, patient, weaving a complex tapestry of doubt, with each witness and each piece of evidence. Today, however, something shifted. It wasn't the evidence that would change the tide, it was the defense attorney himself. He was no longer just a lawyer. He had become the embodiment of the story he was trying to tell. His words cut through the courtroom like a blade, precise and deliberate. "This case is not about guilt or innocence," he said, his voice low, almost conspiratorial. "It's about perception. It's about who you believe." The jury's eyes followed his every movement, every word. He knew how to manipulate the atmosphere, how to keep them on edge. He painted a picture of a man wrongly accused, a person whose only crime was being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The prosecutor, unable to respond immediately, was left on the defensive, reeling from the way the narrative had been turned. For the first time, the tables had shifted. The courtroom now felt like a pressure cooker, the stakes higher than ever. As the defense attorney finished his speech, the room seemed to exhale collectively, the tension momentarily releasing. The prosecutor stood up, his face pale, his eyes searching for words that wouldn't come. The defense had won this round. The pieces had fallen into place with eerie precision, and the jury was no longer as certain as they had been. The defense had crafted a narrative so compelling that doubt had crept into their hearts. But the prosecutor was no fool. He wasn't done. He had one final witness to call. This witness, however, would not just be another pawn in his game. She was a revelation, someone whose testimony could either save him or destroy him. The prosecutor's hand shook slightly as he called her to the stand, but he masked the tremor with a veneer of confidence. His last chance had arrived. The witness walked to the stand, a woman in her early 30s with an air of quiet authority. She looked calm, composed, as if she had done this 1,000 times before. The courtroom grew even quieter, the air thick with the promise of something dramatic. She was the key. Her testimony could either condemn the defendant or exonerate him. As she sat down, her gaze met the defense attorney's, and for a split second, there was an unspoken understanding between them. He knew this woman's role, and he knew that, if she told the truth, it would be a devastating blow. The defense attorney shifted, his body leaning slightly toward the table as he prepared for the inevitable cross-examination. The stakes had never been higher. The final moments of the trial were approaching, and the truth would soon be revealed. There was no turning back now. The witness testimony had shaken the courtroom to its core. The entire atmosphere had shifted. Every eye was now on her, the woman who could either save or condemn the defendant. She sat calmly, her posture straight, as if the weight of the moment didn't even faze her. Her words, however, were a different matter. "I saw him," she said, her voice firm, unwavering. "I saw him at the scene. The defendant was there, and he was not alone. The room held its breath. The defense attorney clenched his jaw, his gaze never leaving the witness. He knew this moment was critical. If she spoke the truth, the case would slip away from him. But something about the way she spoke, too composed, too deliberate, felt off. Could this be the twist that would unravel everything? Or was it a lie so carefully crafted that even he wouldn't be able to expose it? He knew he couldn't waste a second. He stood, his suit sharp, every movement precise. It was time for the cross-examination. The defense attorney stood tall, his voice cutting through the silence as he addressed the witness. "You say you saw him," he began, his tone sharp yet measured. "But what did you see? Was it the defendant's face, or was it merely the figure in the shadows?" He circled her with a calculated precision, every word designed to plant seeds of doubt. The woman didn't flinch. She kept her gaze steady, her answers clear and confident. The defense attorney's mind raced, searching for any inconsistency, any hint of vulnerability in her words. The jury was watching, their eyes locked on the two of them, unable to look away from the drama unfolding. It was a battle of wits, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. The prosecutor, now silent, stood off to the side, watching the exchange with barely concealed anticipation. The game was afoot, and both sides knew that the next few moments could decide everything. The tension in the courtroom was unbearable. Every word a witness spoke felt like it had the potential to shatter the case, but as the defense attorney's questions continued, something began to shift. The woman's responses, once confident, began to falter. A slight hesitation here, a nervous twitch there. It was subtle, but it was enough. The defense attorney pounced, pressing her on every detail. "You said you saw him clearly," he repeated, his voice low and precise. "Then why, when asked to identify him earlier, did you hesitate?" The room was silent as the witness' composure began to crack. Her eyes flickered, a brief moment of uncertainty flashing across her face. The defense attorney noticed it immediately, but the damage was done. The seed of doubt had been planted. The jury, once mesmerized by her confidence, was now starting to question everything. The tides were turning. With each passing moment, the courtroom seemed to tilt further away from the prosecutor. The defense had found the cracks, and now they were exploiting them with surgical precision. The witness, once the prosecutor's strongest piece, was no longer certain. Her answers had become increasingly evasive, and the defense attorney was relentless. He raised his voice slightly, not to intimidate but to add weight to his words. "How could you be so sure? After all this time, after all the uncertainty, you're claiming you saw the defendant in the heat of the moment." The witness shifted in her seat, her composure slipping further. For the first time she seemed unsure, her hands trembling as she clutched the edge of the podium. The prosecutor, standing off to the side, had no response. He could only watch as the defense attorney skillfully dismantled the very foundation of the witness's testimony. The moment of truth arrived with a final question from the defense attorney, one that would change the course of the trial. "You've testified that you saw him at the scene," he said, his voice carrying through the room. "But the truth is, you never saw his face, did you?" The silence that followed was deafening. The witness's face went pale, her eyes widening as the truth began to dawn on her. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. The courtroom waited, holding its breath. The defense attorney didn't move, his gaze locked onto hers, steady and unflinching. The prosecutor, unable to intervene, could only watch as the witness story crumbled before the eyes of the jury. The scales of justice seemed to tip in favor of the defense, the battle now decisively in their hands. But there was one last twist to come. The final revelation, the one no one could have predicted, was just around the corner. The jury's eyes shifted uneasily, as the weight of the testimony hung in the air. The witness had all but collapsed under the pressure, and the defense attorney's final question was still echoing through the room. The prosecutor stood motionless, his jaw tight, knowing that the momentum had shifted in a way he might never recover from. The defense attorney returned to his seat, his eyes never leaving the jury box, silently letting the silence speak for him. In that silence, a new energy took hold, one of uncertainty, suspicion, and unease. The defendant exhaled slowly, though his hands still trembled under the table. For the first time in weeks there was a glimmer of hope. But everyone knew hope was fragile here. One wrong move, one unforeseen twist, could shatter it entirely. The prosecutor rose slowly, his movements deliberate, as though each step toward the bench was calculated to reclaim his authority. His voice carried a calm that was almost too controlled. "The defense wants you to believe doubt is the same as innocence," he began, scanning the jury with sharp eyes. His words rolled with measured conviction, but there was a flicker in his gaze, the faintest sign that he felt the case slipping. He paced in front of the jury, the sound of his polished shoes against the wooden floor echoing like a metronome. The defense attorney leaned back, his expression unreadable, watching for any misstep. The jury remained still, hanging on each word, yet the room felt split, as if two truths were colliding in the same space. The defense attorney countered with surgical precision. "Suspicion isn't proof," he said, his voice steady but carrying a quiet force. He moved toward the jury, lowering his voice just enough to draw them in. "You've heard words, but words can be bent. You've seen fragments, but fragments can be arranged into any picture someone wants you to see." The jurors leaned forward slightly, instinctively caught in the rhythm of his delivery. The prosecutor's knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the table. This was no longer about facts, it was about control over the story. And right now, the defense owned the narrative. The judge's gavel struck sharply, bringing the verbal duel to a close. "We will recess until tomorrow morning," she declared. The tension in the room didn't break, it only shifted. Lawyers gathered their papers with precision, jurors avoided eye contact with either side, and the gallery buzzed in low whispers. The defendant rose slowly, his expression unreadable, yet his eyes darted toward the witness stand, as if seeking an answer that would never come. Outside, cameras would be waiting. Inside, strategies would be rewritten overnight. The trial was no longer a steady march toward verdict, it had become a knife fight in the dark. As the room emptied, the defense attorney lingered at the table, staring at a single sheet of paper in front of him. It wasn't evidence, it was a note, slipped to him during the recess call. "Just 6 words, you're defending the wrong man." His stomach tightened, but his face stayed neutral. He folded the paper and tucked it into his jacket as he rose. The prosecutor glanced at him from across the room, the faintest smirk tugging at his lips. Outside the courtroom doors, the noise of reporters and flashing cameras grew louder, a reminder that the trial was as much a performance as it was a pursuit of truth. Inside, both men knew tomorrow's battle would not be fought on facts alone. The next morning, the courtroom felt different, tighter, heavier, as if the walls had closed in overnight. The defense attorney sat rigid, the note from yesterday tucked deep inside his jacket, its words pressing on him like a stone. The prosecutor entered briskly, his expression sharpened into something unreadable. The gallery was already buzzing, the press leaning forward for any hint of drama. The defendant kept his eyes low, avoiding the stares, his fingers tapping nervously on the table. Everyone sensed it, something was about to break. The judge entered, her gaze sweeping the room like a blade, and the murmurs died instantly. The air was charged, not with anticipation, but with the static of a storm about to hit. The prosecutor wasted no time. "Your Honor," he said, voice firm, "the state calls a new witness, down tonight." Gasps rippled through the gallery. No one expected this. From the back, a tall man in his late 40s stepped forward, his face half hidden by the brim of a hat he removed as he approached. The defense attorney's stomach dropped. He knew that face. The man had been part of the original investigation, and his testimony had been sealed. Now, here he was, walking to the stand like a ghost dragging the past behind him. The jurors leaned forward, sensing the significance. The judge's gavel tapped lightly. "Proceed," she said, her voice neutral, but her eyes watching closely. The witness spoke with deliberate calm, each word dropping like a stone into still water. "I saw something that night," he began, "and I was told to keep it to myself." The courtroom seemed to collectively lean in. He described a figure fleeing the scene, but it wasn't the defendant. The defense attorney's pulse quickened, while the prosecutor's jaw tightened. The jurors exchanged glances, the shift in their expressions undeniable. This was more than testimony, it was a fracture in the case itself. But the witness hesitated before revealing more, his eyes darting toward the prosecutor. The defense caught it instantly. There was more here. Something dangerous. The defense attorney rose slowly, stepping toward the witness stand. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. Who told you to keep it to yourself? The witness hesitated, the pause long enough to make the jurors shift in their seats. It came from above, he finally said, his tone low. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably, his pen tapping against the table. The defense pressed harder, each question peeling away another layer of the truth. The gallery was silent, the air electric. The judge leaned forward slightly, as if sensing the gravity of what was unfolding. Then came the crack that shattered the room. The witness, voice shaking now, said, "It was the prosecutor's office. They told me to bury it." The words hung in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore. The prosecutor shot to his feet, objecting loudly. But the judge's gavel struck with a force that silenced the room. The jurors' faces had changed, not just doubtful now, but something sharper, angrier. The defense attorney sat down slowly, the note in his jacket feeling heavier than ever. The trial had just taken a turn from which there was no return. The air in the courtroom was leaden with tension. The judge's gavel strike from the day before still echoed in everyone's minds. The prosecutor sat stiff, shoulders squared but eyes shadowed with fatigue. Across the aisle, the defense attorney leaned back, deceptively calm, the folded note in his pocket burning like a live coal. He knew the witness revelation had cracked the prosecution's armor, but cracks could still be patched, unless he made the right move now. The defendant stared at the table, jaw tight, his mind trapped in an invisible battle. Outside, the storm clouds pressed against the tall windows, filtering the light into cold grays, as if the sky itself anticipated what was coming. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. "We will hear further testimony," she said, her voice steady but clipped. The prosecutor stood, his voice cutting through the quiet like glass. "Your Honor, I recall the original investigator to the stand." Gasps flickered through the gallery. The man, mid-40s, rumpled suit, eyes tired from carrying truths too long, walked forward, each step sounding heavier than the last. He took the oath without looking at either lawyer. The defense attorney's gaze locked on him. He remembered this man's role in the case, and the missing report that had never surfaced. The prosecutor's questions came fast. "Tell the court what you found that night." The investigator's voice was low, deliberate. "I found 2 sets of footprints, one matching the defendant's shoes, and another, smaller." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. The defense attorney's pen stopped mid-note. "And did you document this?" the prosecutor pressed. The man hesitated. "I did, but the second set of prints never made it into the official report." The silence that followed was suffocating. Even the judge's eyes flicked sharply toward the witness, sensing the gravity of his words. The defense attorney rose like a slow tide, his voice quiet but unyielding. "Who told you to leave that out of the report?" The investigator's jaw tightened. "I was told it would confuse the case." "By whom?" Silence. The defense's eyes narrowed. Was it someone in the prosecutor's office? The investigator's gaze flicked toward the table where the prosecutor sat. It was just a glance, but in a courtroom like this, a glance could be a gunshot. The jury caught it. So did the judge. The air felt razor thin. The prosecutor slammed his hand on the table. "Objection!" His voice rang with both outrage and something dangerously close to panic. The judge's gavel struck once, the sound reverberating in the hushed room. But the damage was done. The jury had seen the look. The defense attorney returned to his seat, his expression unreadable, though the faintest trace of a knowing smirk curved his lips. The defendant finally looked up, meeting his lawyer's eyes for the first time that day. Outside, the first drops of rain hit the windows, a soft percussion to the storm that had just broken inside. The storm outside had deepened, rain streaking the courthouse windows in silver veins. The jury filed in, their faces pale from the weight of what they were about to do. The defense attorney sat unnervingly still, his fingers laced together, the folded note hidden in his palm like a secret that still cut deep. The prosecutor kept his gaze forward, his jaw locked in grim defiance. The defendant, hands trembling slightly, dared a glance at the jurors, searching for anything that resembled mercy. The judge's voice broke the silence. Has the jury reached a verdict? A single word from the foreman, yes, sliced through the room like a blade. The foreman rose, paper trembling in his hand. Woo the jury, find the defendant. A pause hung in the air so long it felt like the room itself stopped breathing. Not guilty. Gasps erupted in the gallery, the sound colliding with the pounding rain outside. The defendant's eyes widened, his mouth opening as if to speak, but no words came. The defense attorney exhaled slowly, almost imperceptibly, while the prosecutor's face drained of color. The judge's gavel struck once, a single punctuation mark, on the trial's conclusion. But even as relief spread across the defense table, something colder lingered beneath it. As the courtroom erupted in murmurs, the defense attorney leaned toward his client. "You're free," he said, though his voice carried no triumph. The defendant gave a small nod, but his eyes flickered away, toward the witness stand, toward something unseen. The folded note in the attorney's hand felt heavier now, those 6 words gnawing at him, "You're defending the wrong man." He looked at his client, at the man he'd just saved, and felt the gnawing weight of uncertainty claw at his chest. The law had spoken, but truth had remained silent. Reporters swarmed as they stepped outside, microphones and cameras like a sudden onslaught. Flashbulbs lit the rain-soaked steps, every moment caught and broadcast. The defendant kept his head down, while the defense attorney's jaw stayed tight, answering only with clipped phrases. The prosecutor emerged separately, flanked by aides, his face unreadable, his eyes avoiding both the cameras and the defense. The storm raged on above them, a fitting echo for the turmoil, still boiling beneath the trial's end. Somewhere in the crowd, the man who had slipped the note was gone, vanished before the truth could follow him. Hours later, the defense attorney sat alone in his office, rain tapping against the windows like an unending metronome. The file on the case lay open, but his eyes weren't on the documents. They were on the folded note, now opened and resting on the desk. The words stared back at him, immutable and damning. "You're defending the wrong man." He closed his eyes, the victory hollow, the truth corrosive. In the silence, he realized this was the one case that would haunt him forever. Not because of what he'd lost, but because of what he might have won for the wrong soul.